We were very excited to hear from Dr. Ben Boggs from Missouri Department of Post-Secondary and Workforce Development. We're also very, very excited to hear from our next set of presenters. We're just thrilled to have them with us. So I'm just going to do a little bit of an introduction, and then I'm going to turn it straight over to the folks that you're actually here to hear from. So in case you are just joining us, my name is Gina Johnson. I am director of the PSEO Coalition, and welcome. We are providing all kinds of information today about post-secondary to workforce outcomes. And the PSEO Coalition, I'd like to shares a multitude of partners. We collaborate with all kinds of folks, obviously the states, the members of our coalition. We also have some wonderful philanthropic partners and some other nonprofit partners and organizations. But I want to call out specifically right now Strata Education Foundation, and specifically Strata Education Foundation's State Opportunity Index and their Clear Outcomes Indicators. We have been using these. We have been talking with our states about these because they're a very helpful tool to help us think about collectively what are those foundations that really build a really solid education to workforce data ecosystem. And the reason we are featuring the 3 states we are indeed featuring today were because they were called out in some of the materials in the State Opportunity Index Clear Outcomes as leaders in sharing data, sharing information with their constituents, and using data in really unique ways. So today we're going to hear from Minnesota's Steve Rogness. We're going to hear from Texas's Dr. Melissa Humphries, and we're going to hear from Colorado's Michael Vente. And each of them is going to share their screen, and they're going to drive themselves. You've all been on a Zoom and you asked if you can drive. We thought we would spare you as much as we can. The next slide, please, that we all politely need to do. We ask that you all give us grace as we transition from each of the speakers, because we'll need to switch sharing screens so the appropriate person can be sharing their screen. And I will say one more thing, which is that some of the links that folks are sharing in their slides, we have an awesome person, Dr. Ali Bell, who's going to be sharing those links in the chat. So you can just copy paste them if you want to open up some of the materials and see live what some of the things that Steve, Melissa, and Michael are going to be sharing. So I'm going to turn it over to Steve, and I'm going to stop sharing so Steve can share his screen.
All right. Thanks, Gina. Let's see how I do here. Getting there. All right, how's that?
Perfect. We see it. Yep. Thanks, Steve.
Great. Well, thanks. It's great to be with everybody this afternoon. Can it still be morning in a different time zone? Not sure. But anyway, great to be here with you all. And excited to talk to you some about Minnesota education to workforce data. So my name's Steve Rogness. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a senior research analyst at the Minnesota Office of Higher Education. There's really 2 parts to my job. One is I manage our student level enrollment and awards conferred data collections. And then I'm also our agency's coordinator with our state longitudinal data system SLEDs. And so in all of that, I'm doing a lot to work with education to workforce data. And I'm going to be talking a lot today, or in just the next handful of minutes here about our SLDS, our longitudinal data system, SLEDs, but I also wanted to start just by talking about some of how we're starting to use the Census PSEO tool and some about Minnesota's participation in Census PSEO. So we've been participating in the Census PSEO coalition for the last 2 or 3 years, and we have good data coverage in Minnesota. So our state contributes data to the Census PSEO tool from both public systems, Minnesota State Colleges and Universities and the University of Minnesota, as well as 18 private nonprofits. I think the Census PSEO tool currently lists our coverage rate at somewhere in the 70% range, 70 plus, but that includes, I think, if you exclude 2 large online-only graduate for-profit institutions, Capella University and Walden University, that aren't in the tool, our graduate coverage is more like closer to 90%. And although, a lot of the educational workforce data that I'm going to be talking about is specific to Minnesota SLED, so looking at Minnesota employment outcomes. Of course, through PSEO, we're getting access to see national employment outcomes, so it's a fantastic resource for us. And I think we're only just beginning to scratch the surface of how we can use that data, but it's already been really helpful coming up when we get questions, for example, from legislators about how the percentage of students that stay in Minnesota, how that looks after graduating college from Minnesota, so able to pull some really great statistics from the Census PSEO website around that kind of thing. And so, and then with Minnesota SLEDs, what I'll be really diving into is really kind of painting a picture for how this data system has been developed over, close to 20 years now, to in a way that really allows the data to be very distributed so that lots of different folks can use it to analyze educational workforce patterns for their purposes. Lastly, I mentioned the many of the Census PSEO partners in the state, but we like to think we're a very collaborative state in Minnesota. So I just want to particularly acknowledge Minnesota State Colleges and Universities, the University of Minnesota, and the Minnesota Private College Council, with whom we coordinate on all of our Census PSEO work. Let's see. Now I need to see if I can get to the next slide. There we go. So this is just a quick overview of Minnesota SLED. So I think the key thing I kind of wanted to emphasize here is that in our longitudinal data system, we are bringing together the full data sets across college enrollment and completion, K-12 enrollment, college enrollment and completion, and Minnesota unemployment insurance data, so Minnesota employment outcomes, as well as multiple other data sets. But those are like the three core ones. And those are all brought in really in their entirety and then fully linked at the individual level. And so it gives us a lot of flexibility to look at different education to workforce patterns. So for example, we're not only looking at the employment outcomes for college graduates, we're also looking at, for high school students that didn't go to college, what do their employment outcomes look like? And gives us a lot of advantages for how flexible we can be with that. And then it's really the three core agencies of our agency, the Minnesota Office of Higher Education, Minnesota Department of Education, and the Department of Employment and Economic Development, DEED, that jointly run that data system, our state longitudinal data system, SLEDs. I should note the post-secondary completions includes from pretty much all public and private colleges in Minnesota from 2007 on, and then employment data, again, that's the UI covered Minnesota employment from 2003 on. The employment data set in Minnesota includes wages, hours, it does have hours worked, and industry, but we don't yet have occupation, and so that's really top of our wish list for a further enhancement. When I'm talking about the way that SLED's data use is really distributed, there's three primary levels of access. So there's public reports. And so here's the link to our public site where there's a lot of dashboards and public reports on using SLED's data. The data is generally organized by cohorts, so looking at high school graduates and then looking at college students and college graduates. It includes employment outcomes of college graduates in those public reports. But another really important functionality that we've built out in Minnesota for folks to be able to use this data is that data providers can request access to data on their students. So schools and colleges, so high schools, school districts and colleges and universities can access de-identified individual level data through a secure portal where they're logging in to download those records and to be able to do analysis themselves. And so there's a lot of projects that can be done with that. And then even further, folks can go all the way to an external research project request and a data request application, which also gives data providers the ability to tie data back to other data on their end. And so, for instance, colleges there have been examples of projects where universities in Minnesota, University of Minnesota Twin Cities, as well as Minnesota State University Mankato, have both done sizable projects connecting that data back to be able to look at the program level. So the data in the data system is structured at the level of IPED's award level plus 6-digit zip code, but that doesn't actually identify a particular program all the way to the program detail level. And so folks can request that, though, to be able to really do that detailed analysis that they need to analyze at the program level, the employment outcomes. And so just lots of ways that we're trying to get the information into people's hands who are trying to inform in decisions that are made to improve outcomes for students. And here I've just listed some of those examples of where you can find that data. So I already talked about the SLED's public reports. This is a direct link to the employment outcomes for college graduates on that site. There's also a data section where you can see a lot of the more in-depth research that's been done. SLEDs includes some occupational licensure. So for example, health licensure and teacher licensure are both in there. So there was a particular project looking at the Minnesota teacher workforce that was really interesting. Probably the main tool we talk about for employment outcomes in Minnesota is the graduate employment outcomes tool that's published by the Minnesota Department of Employment and Economic Development. And so I've got the link to that here as well. And I think those might be getting put in the chat, but if not, I'll put those into the chat later. But that tool, you can look by degree level, institution level. Sorry, it's at the level of institution and degree level, and 4-digit zip code with employment outcomes at the roughly like 2, 5, and 8 years after graduation. We also then, our agency publishes employment outcomes in various ways. Minnesota Office of Higher Education, so we include that in our Minnesota Measures dashboard, as well as a college search tool, My Higher Ed. It's used for federal reporting in various ways. So DEED uses SLED's educational workforce data to report on WIOA to meet federal WIOA reporting requirements of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunities Act for reporting on all programs listed on the state's eligible training provider list. Department of Education uses it for federal Perkins reporting. I mentioned examples of colleges and universities using SLED's data for in-depth analysis of employment outcomes of their graduates. And school districts have been really interesting projects looking at analyzing the employment outcomes for college and career academies. And so those are just some of the ways that the data is used and some of the main places that the data is published to display employment outcomes for folks and inform decision making. And that's all I've got for you. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Steve. This is fantastic. I love featuring the work that you all are doing. This is very, very helpful. We're going to transition next to Dr. Melissa Humphries from the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. Hi, Melissa, and hopefully you're able to share your screen as well. Let us know if you need us to share. Oh, and actually we're not, I can see you talking, but I can't hear you.
Okay, can you hear me?
Oh, yes, thank you.
Great.
Thanks so much, Melissa.
So now let's see if I can share one thing at a time. Share this. All right. Are you seeing my?
I am. Yeah, looks perfect.
Wonderful.
Ready to go.
Okay. And I'll try to do a live demo in the middle, so we'll see how that works out. But good afternoon, everyone. I'm Melissa Humphries. I'm excited to be here today. I'm the Assistant Commissioner of Data Management and Research at the Texas Higher Education Coordinating Board. And today I'm going to show you a couple of the tools we've recently developed and are developing, continually improving, that focus on our longitudinal data and that we use to help share insights with key stakeholders in Texas. So to start, just to give you a quick description of what the data management and research team does at our agency, we oversee the full data pipeline of higher education data in Texas, which includes collecting the data from all the institutions in Texas, analyzing it, and creating the required output and hopefully useful output for stakeholders. We also facilitate the linking of K-12, higher ed, and workforce data for the state. And there are several places in statute that's required, but we're continually trying to move beyond required and make it just more and more useful to everyone. So when I say the linked data, we refer to it as the tri-agency data linking in Texas, which is unspecific, but it includes Texas Education Agency, which has K-12 data, PK through 12 data, the Higher Ed Coordinating Board, which has higher ed data, and the Texas Workforce Commission, which they have lots of workforce data, but what we use mostly for linking is the UI wage records. And we've actually had in statute a SLDS like repository of data for researchers to use since 2006. And we have a board that researchers can apply to use the SLDS data. So we have a long history of working together to make this data useful. But today I'm going to focus on two specific examples, kind of newer data tools that we're using to share with some different stakeholders. First, I'll talk about a limited access example, which is our secure dashboards, and then I'll talk about public access example of another tool. So a key stakeholder for us are the institutions themselves that send us all the data that we use, the higher ed institutions. And one thing we really want to continue to do is to be a resource. So if we can provide information back to the institutions that can be helpful to them, especially when we can link their data with information that they might not easily have access on their own. So specifically in this case, the workforce information. Some institutions do have agreements with the Workforce Commission, but most don't. So we really want to be helpful where possible. So we developed a secure dashboard where approved users can access small cell data from their own institution on certain topics. So our current version, and as I said before, all of these are things we're continually improving and working on, includes 3 dashboards for the institutions: persistence and graduation, transfer, and labor market outcomes. Today, I'll focus on the labor market outcome that uses the tri-agency data. So as I mentioned before, these dashboards are limited access because we do show information at the small cell level, so unmasked aggregated data. So only approved staff from the institutions themselves have access to this. Because of this, I'm not doing a live demo of the actual dashboard. I have some screenshots of what's developed so far, and I'll show, it shows numbers from all institutions together. So this dashboard contains 2 main pieces of information for institutions. First, analysis about the debt of their graduates, and also job placement / wages of their graduates. So apologies, the screenshot is a little blurry, but the main overview page shows many of the breakouts that the institutions are able to pick from, which, as we all know, can make the outputs small cell very quickly. But it allows the user to filter on grad cohort year, the program they graduated from, the industry the graduate was found employed in, demographic characteristics, and then we have SCH they completed before graduation, which gets into some questions about excess credit hours. So a key feature in these dashboards is the ability for the institution to compare their outcomes to peer group institutions in the state. So just to note, the peer group comparisons are many institutions that are considered peers for the one institution that's looking at this data. So there is masking on the peer side on the right here when an institution is looking at it. But when they're looking at it, they would only see their data here on the left, which could get small. So here's an example of another piece that can, or other exploration that can be done in the dashboard. So institutions can look at the information over time. This example only shows 2 years, I know, which doesn't a trend make, but we're adding more cohorts over time. Also, they can look at the data in graphical form instead of table if they would like. Here's another example of a graph we put together that shows time to degree for grads and their debt to wage ratio. And here's just another example of a tab specifically for the debt to wage ratio. So the next example I want to highlight is a public dashboard, so different access level on our DataBridge site. So DataBridge is a public site with links to several dashboards for higher ed information, enrollment, completion, and other student outcomes. But I'm going to focus on the Texas Talent Trajectory, or what we call the T3 dashboard, since this also uses our tri-agency data. This time it's linked between K-12 and higher ed, but I want to highlight it here because we're actively working on adding that workforce piece. So eventually this will tell a whole story from K-12 to workforce. So here's the link to the dashboard itself. I'm going to try to do a quick live demo. Let's see if this works. I might have to switch screen share. All right.
Looks good, Melissa.
Okay, great. So altogether, this T3 dashboard we call shows a cohort, 8th grade cohort information from 8th grade through to higher ed outcomes. And as I mentioned, we're actively working on adding workforce outcomes. So at the first page, the overview just gives high level information, pipeline from 8th grade to 12th grade, some breakouts by gender and race, ethnicity, and it's pretty interactive here. And the user can pick from, we have 3 cohorts that we've mapped all the way through, and the user can go through and pick specific region all the way down to a specific 8th grade campus. So we have some other features here, year-to-year comparisons, but this is the piece that we use the most in conversation, where users can look at a high school grad cohort and even go down to high school campus and follow those students through to post-secondary outcome information. And then finally, we just have a lot of information about data definitions. They can download the data if they want. Some FAQs about the data as well. So that's actually it for me. Thanks for letting me talk a little bit about 2 of the things we've been working on having to do with longitudinal data, and happy to answer questions later if anyone's interested.
Thanks so much, Melissa. Yeah, this is fantastic. And we were, Allie was putting the links in the chat as we went through. So I love it because you provided those for us. And so we can then give them to everyone and they can take a look and poke around, because I suspect this is a group of participants who loves to do nothing more than that. It's kind of get ideas, play with data, and get ideas from other folks. So thanks so much, Melissa. Watch the chat if anybody, as she offered, if anybody has some specific questions for Melissa, pop into the chat and Melissa will be checking those out. I'm going to turn it over now, excuse me, to Michael Vente from Colorado. And then when Michael's done sharing the cool things that Colorado is doing, we're going to bring all 3 speakers back and have one last question that we're going to ask them. But do feel free to be active in the chat. And we also, Michael will be providing the links to the things you share while you're speaking. So thanks so much.
Perfect. No, thank you all so much. It's great to be with you all. Always appreciate this group and being able to have robust conversations on all these great things that we're working on. So as Gina said, I'm Michael Vente. I'm the Chief Performance Officer and Senior Director of Research and Data Governance at the Colorado Department of Higher Ed. And very happy to share with you some of the things that we're doing around better data connections between post-secondary and workforce, and a lot of the work to come. So I also am going to try to share my screen. And so hopefully that looks good. And
Yep.
then we're going to do this. Okay, good.
Perfect. Yes,
Perfect.
perfect.
Great. So I wanted to just give you all kind of a summary of some of our guiding documents in this work that we've been doing to better connect post-secondary and workforce data, and some of our still new goals around that. Also being able to talk about some of the historical reporting that we've done in the ROI space for post-secondary education, and how that has led into the development of new measures of student success and further refining measures of post-secondary value. And then similar to my other colleagues, being able to talk about some of Colorado's longitudinal data work and some updates on that front. So I'm going to start with our strategic plan. So our commission, the Colorado Commission on Higher Education, CCHE, releases a new strategic plan every 5 years. In previous plans, we, like many of you, with the wonderful leadership of the Lumina Foundation, had set goals around educational attainment rates by a certain period of time. And in our latest strategic plan, we really did shift our focus from just measuring educational attainment to being able to measure and increase the number of Coloradans benefiting from valuable career skills obtained in high school or through post-secondary education that, at a minimum, enable better workforce outcomes greater than the cost of attendance. So again, this was a shift for us because, we've done work in this space, in the ROI space, for a long time. We've been part of the PSEO coalition, I think, since the beginning. And so really being able to continue that work on that front. And, we're not completely getting rid of our goals around educational attainment rates, but educational attainment rates were our North Star. Now, our new North Star is really this value ROI conversation around post-secondary education, along with other stars, a lovely constellation of measures that we look at when we think about post-secondary success. One of the ways that we do that, as you all very well know, is through better data and really being able to think about ways in which we bring data together in well-governed, responsible ways to better answer all of these questions, whether it is a question on just post-secondary student success, or again, a question or a use case that spans that education, training, and workforce continuum in some way, shape, or form. So very much making sure that we have that at the forefront of our mind as we do all of our work. In addition to the strategic plan, we had a bill here in Colorado pass, HB 22-1349, which tasks the department with doing lots of things. And I won't go into all of the components of that. You'll see some of those here on the screen. But the main one that I want to focus on today was being able, with, of course, our commission, to develop new measures of student success that measure the progression of students through post-secondary education and those impacts on pathways and student career opportunities. And so very much using, building on the work that we've done and through the new strategic plan through 1349, making sure that we have, again, that value ROI conversation at the forefront. As part of this work, we've done this in a variety of ways over the years. I want to say probably for maybe 6 or 7 years now, we have released our annual ROI report, really being able to assist lawmakers, taxpayers, students, and families in better understanding that ROI of post-secondary education. And to that end, we look specifically at undergraduate programs, certificate programs offered at the public institutions of higher ed, and we look at those median 1, 5, and 10-year earnings outcomes. So being able to make sure that very much aligned to PSEO's work in a lot of ways, and being able to see what those outcomes look like. In addition to looking at ROI, there are other measures that are related to ROI that we publish in the report, like time and credits to degree, like percent of students with debt or their average amount of debt. The list goes on too. So, and again, some alignment between what we just heard from our other state colleagues there as well. We also have a tool that shows some of these data, at least those earnings data. So being able to break this down by institution, degree level, and program, and then different years, because again, we've been doing this for quite some time, looking at those median 1, 5, and 10-year earnings outcomes, disaggregated by institution, by degree, and by program, whether it be at the 2-digit or 4-digit SIP level. Additionally, I want to give a shout out to my wonderful colleague who I think is on the call, Stan Stan Gladdick, who has worked on a lot of the ROI data over the years and has helped us refine this interactive tool. So you can see not just those median 1, 5, and 10-year earnings outcomes, but also the percentiles in each one of those. So really being able to show more of that nuanced information about what are we seeing in terms of those wage outcomes for institutions, for their programs, and all of those different degree levels. So, again, that's the work that we have been doing for quite some time. We had the new strategic plan in 1349 tasking us with taking that work to the next level. And to help support that, we convened a technical working group to support the implementation of the strategic plan in 1349 with stakeholders in Colorado, but also national experts to help us determine those specific measures of post-secondary value and those measures related to the progression of students through post-secondary education. I want to give a specific shout out again to my colleague Stan Gladdick and so many who helped us so much on some of these fronts, but also Dr. Gina Johnson and Dr. Emily House and Disraeli Cruz all played a key role in our technical working group conversations and being able to help us with these stakeholders better understand what we would be aiming for from a Colorado perspective. So the group met monthly between June 2023-ish until fairly recently, this past fall. Almost, yeah, as I said, monthly, 90-minute meetings, mostly virtual, and the meetings were public as well. So being able to make sure that we have that visibility to the public and other audiences of when we talk about other measures of student success and specifically related to value and ROI, making sure that we have the right people in the room, the right perspectives, the collective wisdom of how best to do all of that, and of course, doing it in a transparent way. We had various members as part of this technical working group. We had some of our commissioners, the chair and vice chair of the commission actually were part of the group. We also had, of course, departmental staff. We had colleges and universities have representatives in those conversations, also community stakeholders, bringing that community voice, and as I said, some national experts who have been part of these spaces as well. So through all of that work of the technical working group, we arrived at the Colorado value threshold model, or the minimum value threshold, really being able to think about what are those incremental earnings that someone gains above what they would have what they would have in terms of just a high school graduate earnings, subtracting out from that the cost specific to attending higher education, and that gives us the Colorado minimum value threshold. I'll put a little bit of a finer point on it with some more details here, really being able to, again, see those median earnings by institution and field, and then comparing, subtracting out from there, what would have a person made if they just had a high school education. Again, also removing tuition fees, books, and supplies, and also taking into account financial aid, also the opportunity costs that are associated with someone who maybe is in post-secondary education, but not fully in the workforce. So trying to capture that as well. And that led to, again, this minimum value threshold model. So trying to keep it fairly simple in terms of what is someone making above what a high school graduate would make, minus their costs of attending post-secondary education, giving us this model. So with all of this, we have some data that's available, and we can absolutely do better with some SLDS work, and I'll get to that in a second. But with all of that, we do have the unemployment insurance data from our Colorado Department of Labor and Employment. We have a data sharing agreement that helps govern that and provides us with those data to do those calculations. We've also incorporated into the MVT, minimum value threshold model, the counterfactual earnings. And that's what I meant when I said what a high school graduate would make. So we don't have the best individual level data for people on that front. So for those earnings and being able to proxy those earnings, we used American Community Survey data and really being able to think about that and being able to have an apples to apples comparison as best as we could. So taking into account demographics, geography as best as we could in some of those conversations as well. Additionally, tuition and fee data. Many states, especially systems of higher ed, have these data from their universities and colleges. And so just using that in terms of what we have used in terms of plugging it into the formula. And again, I'll get to this a little bit later. While these are all very helpful, and I think we've done it with as much fidelity as we can always do more and better with better data. And I think that's where SLDS systems can come in, really being able to lift this up as a use case and being able to knit together the appropriate data sets under that SLDS umbrella. So this is a little bit of what it looks like. For this, I'm showing what that statewide MVT, minimum value threshold, looks at by degree level. So within the framework here, we look at green being above the threshold and yellow being below the threshold. Now, it could be $2 above or below the threshold, or multiple thousands of dollars above and below the threshold. Anyway, we know that information, but just being able to kind of put that in a green yellow is what came from those technical working group conversations. And as you can see here, we have differences by credential level, but when we look at the total for all different programs in Colorado, 86% of individuals in those programs have a positive MVT. And so really being able to lift that up as a key finding from a lot of our MVT work. I'll also mention, you'll see some of the suppression that we deal with here. I know this is something we all navigate too, of being able to make sure that we are adhering to data privacy standards and not doing anything we shouldn't be doing. And so because we're putting all of these data sets together with Stan's wonderful help, we may have very small cell sizes, depending on the degree level, depending on the program, depending on the institution. So there is some suppression that does creep in the more you disaggregate. So we're going to continue conversations using this output. We have calculated that MVT output for all the public institutions of higher education in Colorado and their programs at the 2-digit SIP level. And we also have worked on the 4-digit SIP level as well. Shared that with each individual institution. So they have seen that output at the aggregate level for their institution. We've also shared with the commission more of that statewide look at these numbers and what the MVT looks like, and talked about it during our commission meetings. And I think we'll continue to socialize that with commissioners and being able to get more from them on how we use this output for all of the good work. And to be able to lead into collaborative conversations between us at the department, our commission, and the individual institutions of higher ed. How can we look at these data and identify what those levers might be depending on the institution, depending on the program, where we can increase student success? Maybe that looks like, especially for programs that have a high societal value, but maybe are below the MVT, what are some ways that the state can intervene and maybe support those types of programs because there is such a need for them? And so we'll continue to do that work with our commission and share more and more with the institutions of what we're seeing when we put all of these things together. So that then leads me to more conversations around the Colorado statewide longitudinal data system. This was the SLDS now is formally codified in Colorado statute through HB 241364. We've done lots of different longitudinal related things in Colorado over the years, but this is the first time that it's been in statute and has dedicated funding. And so that's always wonderful. It's being led by our Office of Information Technology, which is the state's IT agency, with representation from Department of Higher Ed, Labor and Employment, our K-12 partners at the Colorado Department of Education, also our early childhood partners at the Department of Early Childhood, and our Office of Economic Development and International Trade. So really being able in this first phase as we build this functionality within the Office of Information Technology, focusing on that education, training, and workforce part of the continuum. There are 3 different stakeholder groups that OIT manages here. I sit on them all, and so I try to provide that perspective of the different things that we have been working on. And we've identified use cases for this work, really focusing again on that transition from high school into post-secondary into workforce, or high school directly to workforce. What does that all mean and look like? And being able to to use the SLDS to better evaluate interventions and programs so that we can better serve students' needs and increase their success. I'll also mention that we've had a flurry of reports on this work in Colorado on the SLDS front recently. We are required per that bill, HB 22-1349, to do an annual report on some of this work. Our 25 report really focused on how we can use the SLDS to make better those measures of value. And so are there other workforce data sets? Dr. Boggs mentioned at the beginning their ability within Missouri to have more of those data in one place. And I think via an SLDS, we're able to do that in a similar way. And so what can we do to be able to knit those things together and get more nuanced or more robust measures of value for students? And so we'll continue to work on that. Also, the Office of Information Technology, who's been working on the Colorado SLDS, put out their interim report recently. So that's also there. So more work to do on that front. And then I'll also mention kind of a grouping in Colorado, the Better Data for Better Decisions Coalition, recently released a report too in terms of the Colorado SLDS. I'll also give a shout out to Dr. Gina Johnson, who played a role in helping with that report, which is wonderful and great, and really being able to see a lot of alignment between the work that we're doing with OIT on the Colorado SLDS, the work that we have also been doing in terms of value and ROI for post-secondary programs, and just continuing to kind of lift that up of why that's important and some good reasons why having more of those data connected, again, in well-governed, responsible ways, can help us in so many ways to be able to increase student success, better understand the impact of programs, build that evidence base for different policy decisions that might be coming, and then, of course, also helping students and families navigate the best decisions for their circumstances. So I think that's what I have in terms of my presentation.
Thank you so very much, Michael.
And Allie, thank you so much for all those links. I know there were a lot in my presentation, so thank you very, very much.
I love it. All of our copy paste fingers are going to be sore for a very good reason. While I invite Melissa and Steve to come back off video, if you're able to, and join us back as a panel here. I just want to use my privilege as the host to call out the fact that, and I think this is probably true of so many people on this call, but I'm going to call this out specifically of Steve, Melissa, and Michael. Until I worked with the PSEO Coalition, and specifically with folks whose job it is to share complex information with a lot of different people who may understand different levels of the complexities. I've never worked with a group of folks who is so good at being so concise and explaining things in ways that you just sort of go, okay, I get it. My mom could also probably get that. And then I'll get different levels of nuance, and I'll be able to, as you all have been doing, reaching out to these folks in the chat saying that I want more details. I'm going to connect with you later. But my compliments to all three of you. It's, I highlight the fact that it is literally your job to do that. But not everybody is so great at their jobs as the three of you. So I'm very grateful for that. Actually, on that note, I have a question for each of you, and I guess I'll just kind of ask it in the order that you spoke. You all shared some beautiful examples of data and information that you're sharing via dashboards, reports, downloadable or accessible through application data sets. I'm curious to ask each of you, and so we'll start with you, Steve. How do you think about audience and stakeholders for the data and information that you so concisely shared with us?
Yeah, as I was thinking about that question, one thing is I feel in my role a little bit one step removed from, really thinking through that question, comprehensively, strategically, because I'm so much just in the weeds of like getting the data together to answer the questions, that people need answered. It's like so much of our work is just putting out that basic factual information of what's going on out there. And, laying that really important groundwork. What I would certainly observe is that very key audience is decision makers across the board. So legislature, governor, commissioners, so state level decision makers, but also all the way down to local level decision makers. So school districts and superintendents and colleges and universities and college boards and presidents and folks that are involved in program review and approval, and all of those folks across the board are looking at employment outcomes to understand how investments that are being made in trying to support students' educational workforce journey, how those are playing out. And sometimes that's just looking at the really basic facts, like I said, right? Just sort of median wages at different point times. Sometimes it's getting really in depth on cost benefit analyses to look at, program evaluation. It can take a lot of different shapes. And then, of course, also we're thinking, how does this information kind of get out more to the general public? And so how are we making it available to students and families as they're making their decisions about education to employment journeys? I think the tool I highlighted from our agency, the Office of Higher Education, the My Higher Ed tool is one place where we've begun to add employment outcomes, and that's more of a college search tool, general public communication tool for folks that are looking at options. I know that DEED does some of that with looking at programs listed on the eligible training provider list, for example, and other places that we're thinking about just getting that out to folks that are kind of making their own decisions about their education journeys. And I think, the last thing I want to say about that was, this thing I think a lot of us are thinking about, right? The making the case for the value of college, which of course is where we get into the, return on investment analyses and everything. And, I think it's really interesting to me to think about how this data work can inform and be part of strategic communication efforts to really drive that conversation and impact that narrative, because we know it's a very challenging narrative right now. And our picture of the story, every time we look at those numbers, it's there's a ton to say, of course, right, about just the incredible value of college and higher education. So it's really important, I think, to think about how we inform those efforts.
Yep. Thanks so much, Steve. Again, point of privilege, I am a graduate of Winona State University and the University of Minnesota Twin Cities twice. So as someone who benefited from colleges and universities in Minnesota, it's a story that many of us, especially I think every one of us on this call, believes in, and thinking about how to share that with folks who maybe haven't heard that story in all the ways that we need to share it or thinking about. So thanks so much, Steve. Melissa, I want to ask you the same question, and you have the unique perspective of being a massively populated state. So you're not going to reach every single person in Texas. I don't know if that's ever possible, but how are you thinking about your audience and stakeholders in Texas as related to all the great data that you shared with us?
Yeah, I think I relate to Steve's note about, a lot of the focus is on getting the data together. And then I feel like at our agency, it's been over the last couple of years that we've really we've worked on connecting better the kind of in the weeds data that we share with our institutional researchers, mostly around the state, and other data folks, and making it more accessible so it can be used for more insight. And so in the example I showed with the secure dashboard, that really it's mostly institutional researchers in there, but the goal was to kind of put things together in a way that's easier, faster to pull some insights. But for that was clearly who we were thinking of in our mind. And we even went back and pulled, ad hoc requests our team had gotten from that group over the last few years about these topics to think like, what are the things we want to make sure we add? And then on the opposite side, on the public site, I mentioned that specific cohort tracking. We've actually done it for a while. It's an 8th grade cohort, but it forever was just a link on our data site that we knew a couple people around the state. I mean, really just a couple. If we didn't post it on time, they would contact us. But it was really cool information. And so now we're kind of thinking like, how can we tell the story to a broader audience, not just these specific people looking at it. And for that story, what we've started talking to folks is a lot more thinking about K-12 audience as well, which is not, as usual for our institution or for our agency, but we are working with folks in our agency, the data team is, that do more of the policy work of the college preparation, and who are out there working with colleges and school districts as they prepare students to get to and through college. So yeah, we're constantly grappling with this, and I feel like it's just, there's these huge whiteboards in my head of the audiences and who to go to that is the expert on which audience to continue to improve these tools, because that's kind of what we've learned is it's always iterative. We'll put it out, and if it's not useful to those who it should be useful to, then we'll keep working on it.
I love it. Thanks, Melissa. I would enjoy hanging out with you and those whiteboards in your head. I bet we would have some interesting things to discuss. I always think about Venn diagrams in my brain, so maybe that's what we're drawing on the whiteboard sometimes. I love it. Michael, to you then. Now, Colorado isn't as highly populated as Texas, but Colorado has traditionally imported a lot of its people with degrees. So how does Colorado think about, not everyone, obviously, in Colorado comes in with a degree. Some people are born and raised there, and they want to get some post-secondary education to help them in their workforce. How are you thinking about your stakeholder and audience?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I will concur with everything that Steve and Melissa said on all of those fronts. It's similar things that we've kind of worked through, maybe had some successes, but maybe some not successes over the years in terms of what best resonated with all the different audiences. I will say, for a lot of the work that we've done to date here, I do think from this is my perspective, a lot of it has been, like Steve said, with the policymaker in mind, of being able to equip them for whatever conversations are afoot on as it relates to value of post-secondary education. And I do think, through some of the Tableau tools and the like that we've created, I think we do hope that that's helpful to people. But also, as we all know, if you build it, they might not come. And so we do need to think about other ways to be able to get that information in people's hands to equip them to, again, make the best decision, whatever that might mean to look like for their circumstances. One thing that I think does resonate with me on this front is, and this is maybe more of a data kind of response, but I think what we can do is make sure that we curate the data when we post it to a tool. And, a lot of the tools in the ROI report stuff that we do, we have those supporting Excel files as part of those too. And so anyone could download those and use the data however they might want. And being able to do more and more of that where we have a tool that hopefully is helpful, but then we also have those kind of Excel files that are in a more open data kind of format, because then other groups, other researchers can take those and then do whatever they want with them. I think, PSEO in some ways does that too, with a lot of the data that's downloadable and available. So being able to, from our perch, do more of that, so that if there is a group or a philanthropic group or an advocacy group that wants to be able to use those data to tell that story better and more, how can we just make sure that we're putting it out there in formats that enable them to grab it and use it however they might want?
Love it. Thank you so very much. Huge thank you to Steve, Melissa, Michael. Thank you for participating with us. We're going to leave the chat open again, like the last transition. We're going to leave this all open.